Thanks for inviting me. So when I was invited, I thought I saw the program of the conference, the speaker, and I imagined that they would give a presentation about the finance, KYC, and many of this fintech stuff. So I said I should talk about something different. So I chose e-voting. That is one of the main applications to zero knowledge. And the other reason is that e-voting is at the origin of zero knowledge. So e-voting actually motivated a lot of improvement to zero knowledge protocol, proof of correct decryption, proof of shuffle. But in turn, actually, it is apparently different tool like e-voting and this zero knowledge protocol for cryptocurrency somehow are very related in which they share very similar properties and they rely on very similar building block. Okay. And this is also, in my opinion, the beauty of a computer science, that you invent something for some task and this turns to be useful for a completely different task. Okay? And moreover, sometimes you invent something to, for example, NP completeness was motivated to study the hardness of problems and then turn it to be useful to do something positive. For example, this compiler that you can convert program to circuit are an example of NP completeness. Okay, and for example also SNARK. So SNARK came from the PCP theorem. The PCP theorem was motivated from the study of the hardness of an approximation of problems, a very theoretical problem. Then Micali came with computationally sound proof based on the PCP theorem, and after 20 years SNARK were invented. So this very unrelated, apparently unrelated thing, instead they are very related. Okay, so what is a voting scheme? Essentially, this voting scheme is a digital service for digital election. So people send their votes to some machines, to some authority somehow, we will see how, and then there should be some authority computing the result of the election, okay? But you would like to do these things as more digitally as possible, okay? So usually, for example, we can take a simple function like the referendum. In the referendum, people vote 0 or 1, okay? This is very simple. 0 is no and 1 is yes. And the function is the sum, very simple sum. You can compute with the sum how many people voted yes, and so you can deduce how many people voted no. Okay, what are the requirements for e-voting? So there are many requirements. For example, there is eligibility. They say only legitimate voters should vote. For example, for the election in Luxembourg, you from Canada, you should not be able to vote, right? But two very important requirements that are related to zero knowledge are verifiability and privacy. No? Privacy essentially corresponds to zero knowledge. So the ballot that are the encrypted vote of the people should not leak any information about the vote, right? This intuitively corresponds to the zero knowledge property. And then there is a verifiability. What is verifiability? Verifiability says that essentially there should be no possibility to subvert the result of the election. Think in this way. The authorities should not be able to claim that the result of the referendum was the victory is for yes when the victory was for not, or vice versa. Okay? And you can see that intuitively this corresponds to the soundness requirement of proof system. Okay, so there should be not possibility to prove a false theorem. If the result of the referendum was the yes won, you should not be able to prove that the no won and vice versa. Okay, and then there are other very important property like the coercion resistance that say essentially that you should not be able to buy your vote. Okay, so this in general cannot be done, so that you should assume some special physical assumption like anonymous channel or something like this. Okay, but in this presentation I will more focus on verifiability and privacy. And I would like to stress an aspect that is very relevant in this form. So, for example, Claude talked about non-transferability of proof and non-transferability. Okay, interactive zero-knowledge proof are simulatable. So if you show the transcript to somebody else, he would not believe you. So the proof only convinces you who participate in the proof. Okay, does not convince somebody else. This is very useful property because the verifier would not be able to transfer this proof to somebody else. But in voting, instead, we want a complementary requirement. We want universal verifiability. Universal verifiability means if you have a proof that the election was correct, you should be able to transfer to somebody else. Everybody, not only who participate in the election, should be convinced that the election is correct. This is very different from the requirement we have in zero-knowledge proof, right? So actually, we want a non-interactive zero-knowledge proof. The proof should convince not only who participate in the election of Luxembourg, even maybe in the election, even who is in another country. Okay. So, for example, let's say I want a non-verifiable e-voting scheme. This is very simple. So each voter can send an encryption of his own voter he can post it to what we call bulletin board. You can imagine the bulletin board actually like a blockchain. Okay. And then there is an authority. Okay, this encryption is with respect to a public key of some authority. So the authority knows the corresponding secret key and can use this secret key to decrypt each individual vote and compute the result. Somehow we have some privacy. At least we have privacy against voters. So each voter, the voter P1 cannot deduce information on the voter P2 and so on. Okay, but this is not satisfying. Why? Because what guarantee we have that the result claimed by the authority is correct? So the result of the authority could be that the first two voters voted yes and the third one, the last one voted no, but the authority could say no. Two people voted no. Okay. So if you want perfect verifiability, there is a very nice way. A very easy way. You can give the voting clear. Okay. In this case, it's clear what is the result of the election. So there is always this trade-off between privacy and verifiability. It's like in zero knowledge, no? That zero knowledge and soundness somehow conflict each other. In fact, you cannot have in zero knowledge perfect soundness. Okay. So before going into verifiability, let's introduce a way in which the authority can tally the vote. Tally the vote, it means count the vote at least in a public way. So you can think that this ballot encrypted before, but these ciphertexts are homomorphic. Homomorphic means if I have a ciphertext encrypting a message M1, M1 is an integer, might be 0 or 1, 0 for no and 1 for yes, but could be also 2 could mean Trump, 1 Obama, and 0 another candidate. Okay. So if I have one cipher encrypting an integer M1, and if I have another ciphertext encrypting an integer M2, I can produce a ciphertext that encrypts the sum. Okay. So the idea is that on the bulletin board I have all the ballot, all voters. Then I can homomorphically tally together to have a ciphertext that essentially encrypts the result of the election. Okay. And this is very simple. You can do with El Gamal encryption, or you can do in a better way with Payer encryption, and there are other ways. Okay. But there is also another way, because this system is not good. For example, the authority here not only can prove, can declare false statement about the election, but can decrypt each individual vote. In general, you could not have unconditional privacy. In the sense, you have always to do some assumption. So in fact, you can have some form, so verifiability is, let's say, is easier to achieve than privacy in e-voting. So you can have perfect privacy in e-voting only in a particular setting in which you assume each voter will vote. What does it mean? If I know that all people in this room are eligible for voting, okay, and then I know that every people will cast a vote, then I can have a system in which the authority can compute, that is publicly computable from the ballots, the result of the election, and there is no authority, nobody that can infer the result of each single ballot. But this is a very strong model. Imagine a large country, you have to assume that everybody will go to vote, no? Maybe this is useful in small election, for example, maybe in a company or in other settings, okay? But in general, so let's discard this model that is too strong. So we cannot have perfect privacy, but somehow we can not solve completely the problem, but reduce the trust in the authority by sharing the secret key. So we can assume that there are n authorities that they share the secret key. So each authority individually or a subset of authority cannot break the privacy, but this is still under the assumption that they cannot all collude together, okay? This is a minimal assumption in e-voting when you assume that not all people will go to cast a vote, okay? So this system is called threshold encryption. So a very powerful tool in e-voting that actually I think was invented by Schema for anonymous pseudonyms, as many application is MixNet. Okay, the problem of homomorphic tallying that for complex function is not enough. Okay, so homomorphic tallying can do the sum. Maybe with fully homomorphic encryption now we can compute very complex function, but homomorphic encryption, fully homomorphic encryption is very complex. Okay, another way to do e-voting is to use MixNet in combination with some sort of re-randomizable encryption. So Elgamal encryption, beyond being homomorphic, has also a very nice property that if I have a ciphertext for some randomness, I can re-randomize this ciphertext. So it means that I can produce another ciphertext for the same message, but with different randomness. Okay? Why this is useful? So suppose that I have n ballot, one for each of the voter. So a MixNet is a procedure that does the following. It permutes this ciphertext according to a random permutation, and it re-randomizes each of these ciphertexts. Okay? Now, on the bulletin board, I will have the initial ciphertext and this permuted and re-randomized ciphertext. Now, the authority can decrypt this ciphertext and they can put the result on the bulletin board. So essentially, on the bulletin board, I will have the vote in the clear, but in a permuted way. Okay? So in this case, I can handle all kind of counting function, tallying function, right? Because I have the voting in the clear. So I can do things more complex than just summing the votes, okay? But still there is an issue that this mixer knows the permutation, right? So this mixer, after seeing the vote in the clear, can apply the reverse permutation, so can discover what individual voter voted for. Okay, but still we said we cannot have unconditional privacy, but as for threshold encryption, we can reduce the trust. We can have a multiple number of mixer. So we have a sequence of mixer that apply a permutation in sequence. So and then it's private under the assumption that not all mixer collude together. Okay, for example, if there are two MixNet, okay, the second mixer cannot infer any information because it does not know the first permutation. Okay, so here I permute this vote And then there is a second mixer that permutes according to another random permutation. So the final result, this permutation tau, is the composition of the two permutations. Okay. So until now, I talked about the privacy, actually threshold privacy, that I didn't dig into verifiability. Let's see how the things can be wrong. Okay. If I just use this machinery of homomorphic vote or mixnet and blah, blah, blah. So this misbehaving party can be the voter themselves. What can be happen? For example, a voter can vote, instead of voting in the referendum 0-1, or can input something completely different. And this problem is particularly severe in an homomorphic tallying. In homomorphic tallying, remember, you compute a sum. So if I voter, instead of putting 0-1, I put 100, I give more weight to my vote. Okay? So it's... Then the corrupted party can be the mixer. What can happen? That the mixer does not compute the permutation correctly. Maybe thinks that, I don't know, these votes come from a region in which people vote for Obama, and so can do something strange. Okay, so does not follow the protocol. Okay. And then there are the authorities. I mean, in the end, I remember that I have some permuted ciphertext, and the authority have to decrypt, but the authority can say, okay, the result of the decryption was this one. So how can we check? Okay. And that's why we can use zero knowledge to solve this problem. So we have corrupted party that could not follow the protocol, and zero knowledge is a tool to enforce that the party follow the protocol correctly. For example, you can use zero knowledge to prove that the ciphertext encrypt Obama or Trump, and not any other string. So you can use in homomorphic tallying, and also for mixnet, you can prove that the cipher decrypts to the correct value. So the authority can prove that the result they claim correspond to the real tally. And then you can prove that cipher C and D are a shuffle of A and B. So it means that are permuted and re-randomized according to some randomness and to some permutation. Okay. So another thing I would like to stress that we didn't, I think nobody stressed about this in no presentation, any presentation, is proof of knowledge. So actually, we often talk about zero knowledge, and we say that we prove knowledge. Actually, it's technically not correct. You can think, for example, think to a permutation. I mean, there is a permutation from a number from 1 to 100 to the same set, no? And I want to prove that an element y has the form f to x for some x from 1 to 100. Here there is nothing to prove. The statement is always true. For any y in the range, there is always, because it's a permutation. So in this setting, zero knowledge, because zero knowledge, you prove that something belongs to some language, no? It's useful for membership. But a nice property is the proof of knowledge, that you don't only prove that the statement is true, because that statement could be trivially true, but you prove that you know. I mean, in the case of the permutation, you would prove that you know the preimage. Okay? And this is very useful in e-voting. Why? For example, a problem could happen in e-voting that Alex, for example, cast a ballot. I could cast the same ballot or re-randomize this ballot. Somehow I could be able to cast the same vote of Alex, not knowing what candidate Alex voted for. Okay, I could be able to duplicate the vote of Alex. But proof of knowledge is very useful in this context because I can enforce that this bad behavior does not happen, asking the encryptors, so the voters, to add a proof that they know what they encrypted. They know, for example, the randomness they use to produce the ciphertext. In this case, I cannot profit from seeing the ciphertext of Alex, because I should know what randomness he used to produce the ciphertext. Okay, and yes, as I mentioned, a very important aspect in voting is the universal verifiability. So in this case, we don't care about non-transferability. Actually, we want the proof that is transferable. A nice tool to achieve universal verifiability is to use what is called the Fiat-Shamir transform. So you can observe that many problems in zero knowledge has this form. There is a first message from the prover to verifier, then the verifier sends a random challenge, and then the prover responds with a final message. And everything is okay when this challenge is randomly chosen. But we don't know what happens when it's not randomly chosen. In fact, Claude made an example and is probably right, not zero knowledge when the randomness is not random. The verifier, the bad verifier, can choose a challenge that does not follow the uniform distribution. Okay, but using hash function that are modeled as random order, so they assume that hash function somehow approximate a real random function that somehow is an assumption because this is impossible, no? That a string, hash function is a string of fixed sides can approximate a big table, an arbitrary big table, okay? But using an hash function, I can assume that the challenge is computed as the hash of the first message, essentially. So it's like I prover, I simulate the mind of the verifier. I say the verifier should choose a random challenge, right? I compute this random challenge as output of this hash function. And then you verifier can verify that this is the case because you have the hash function. Okay. So formally this is not zero knowledge, but in application is still enough. We'll discuss later if there are some problem. So we saw that needs are a very important tool. Okay. So we can have proof of correct decryption based on threshold, even non-threshold decryption. We can have proof of verifiable shuffle. Yeah, in the case of mixnet, each mixer will give a proof that the shuffled ciphertext are with respect to a fixed permutation and to some randomness, okay, that they followed the protocol correctly. And NIDSC give universal verifiability. That's a very wished property in e-voting. Okay, for example, here I give an example of verifiable shuffle. Actually, I think it's very similar to the example of Alex did. So it's very basic shuffle. It's not efficient. So I have a list of ciphertext E1, Cn, and E1, En are another list of shuffled and re-randomized shuffle. Okay, so my statement is the list of this C and the list of this A. I would like to prove to the verifier that this ciphertext E are a shuffle of the ciphertext C. Okay? So there exists a permutation and there exists a randomness such that each ciphertext C is some C of some pi I for some permutation pi and internally randomized for some randomness. Okay. So what I can do? I can compute a shuffle of the C for another random permutation and other randomness, and I give you this proof. Then you verify, choose a bit. If the bit is 0, I show you the permutation, the randomness that goes from C to D. If the bit is 1, I show you the randomness, the permutation, the randomness that goes from D to E. Okay. In the end, you will not know the permutation that go from C to E and the randomness that go from C to E. This is sound with probability 1/2, of course, but you can repeat sequentially and decrease the probability of error. It's just an example. They are much more efficient shuffle. Okay, due to NEF, many other shuffle were invented. So e-voting a cryptocurrency. So why? So they are apparently different, but we see that they share very similar properties and they build on very similar building blocks. So Zcash, for example, attempts to preserve privacy or the transaction by means of zero knowledge. Zero knowledge is an ARC. No? Confidential transaction used range proof that is useful tool was used in e-voting. So you want proof that your ballot, the vote you cast is in some range. And the development of this NARC, of this technology, actually now led to very fast shuffle that in turn now are useful again in e-voting. Okay, so, and of course universal verifiability is also a fundamental property in cryptocurrency often. Because everybody won't be convinced that the thing you prove is correct. So what zero knowledge needs in particular cannot guarantee. One thing that, one detail we skipped, and then of course this ballot goes to some bulletin board. This should be public, and usually, actually, I didn't put this detail, you should also add signatures. So you should sign your ciphertext, right, according to your public key. But anyway, no cryptography can prevent that the authority can claim we didn't receive your ciphertext, right?
Unless you get a receipt.
But also with the receipt is very questionable. Yeah. Because I could not give you the receipt, for example. Authority could not give you the receipt. I send the ciphertext, I pretend I don't give you the receipt.
But then at least you know you don't have the receipt.
Yeah, but also here, I don't know that, I know that my cipher didn't go to the bulletin board. I try to send it, but maybe the authority collude with some candidates, say, don't receive this ciphertext from this region because they vote for Obama, you see, and they refuse. And it's also questionable that I can make some claim, because even if I send, for example, this ballot, I mean, it's not clear how I could prove it, that if it was deleted or not. Well, but blockchain may help, no, in distributing the trust of the bulletin board. I think blockchain is the perfect example for a bulletin board, right? So actually it's a perfect bulletin board. So it's very useful in voting. So what also needs cannot guarantee. So I claim that we talk a lot about zero knowledge, but the most important property is not zero knowledge, at least in voting and in this application to cryptocurrency. Zero knowledge is not very important, it's the soundness, the real important property. For example, if in zero cash somebody can know to whom you transfer the money, how much you transfer, okay, it's important, but more important is that you cannot forge new coins. This is much more important property, and maybe somebody knows what I voted for. It's not as important as there are some authority, there are few people in the world that they can make any candidate win, and they can claim that this candidate won when instead another candidate won the election, okay? So the soundness is much more important, at least for this application, than the zero knowledge, right? Do you agree on that? But unluckily, the soundness in NISC is not unconditional. So it means, first there are adversaries that they can always forge false theorems. Not efficiently, but they can always force theorem, and moreover, the soundness holds under some assumption. For example, in the case of NISC derived by the Fiat-Shamir transform, we assume that this hash function is good. This is a trust assumption. If tomorrow or in 10 years someone will break this hash function, maybe the breach allow to compute any false theorem. So you can mint any coin you wish, right? E-voting is less severe because after the flow is discovered, you can just use another e-voting scheme. But yeah, would be also for zero cash, you have to use another system. So let's compare the trust assumption. So actually, yes, zero cash does not use the random oracle model, use the CRS model, so the common reference string model. So in this model, you assume there is a string that is computed correctly. Okay? Actually, this model was invented by my advisor along with Silvio Micali, Feldman, Blum, I think in 88, right? If this CRS is computed correctly, it's true that you cannot prove a false theorem. Well, at least for needs with statistical soundness. Okay? But could be. There could be two cases, according to the variation of the CRS model. That the people who computed this CRS as a trapdoor. By means of this trapdoor, they can always prove false theorem. Or other setting, there is no trapdoor, but you can compute the CRS in a different way, for which you can always prove a false theorem. Okay? And this is the CRS model.
Did you define what CRS means?
Sorry, common reference string.
Yeah,
Sorry?
okay, but just, yeah, that's, can you? Did you, yeah?
Common reference string or common random string. So there are some system in which TCRS is a random string, okay? And some system which is instead is more complex. I think in zero cache snark is a more complex string, okay? And then there is the random OR. In the random OR is still a trust assumption because you assume that this hash function behaves as good as a random function, okay? It might be that some trapdoor is discovered and then you can prove a false theorem. We don't know. What is preferable? Now the community is pushing towards the adoption of random oracle-based proofs. But at least the industrial community should, we should sell the truth. Okay. So, well, so this apparently different tool share similar property. And actually this progress is in snark, in bulletin proof. Now they can be applied back to e-voting. For example, now by means of bulletin proof, you can have very fast shuffle. Now you could have something like this. You can have a big proof that maybe doesn't use snark, and you can classical zero knowledge, and a big computer can verify. But you can also put this bullet proof that can be verified by individual voters just with a phone, for example. Okay. Well, another problem is to improve the soundness of bulletin proofs. Apart beyond from using the random oracle model, bulletin proofs are based on computational binding commitment. I think it's an open problem to construct bulletin proofs based on statistically binding commitment. Another open problem is to find alternative model of zero knowledge with better soundness guarantees. Okay, thank you. And by the way, I would like to thank Bogdan Varisky because part of these slides are taken from him. Thanks. If you have some questions.